So if you want to start off by just saying a little bit about yourself, your experience. I know you have some awesome work experience in your lifetime that you mentioned.
Sure. So a little bit about myself. I'm a biomedical engineer by training. I also have a master's in public health. So I have had a very varied career, as you've just mentioned. When I was at Boston University, where I got my biomedical engineering degree, I had a different work experience while I was there. I was a researcher at Orthopedic Biomechanics Lab at Beth Israel Hospital in Boston. And that's where I did my senior thesis with them on osteoporosis. So I had a focus on biomechanics when I started. Then I also, while I was in college, I took a semester off and I worked at Johnson & Johnson. At the time they were called Johnson & Johnson Professional. I think they're now called DePuy. And they, at the time, were designing medical implants. And I specifically worked on the design of knee implants. And I also worked on the manufacturing floor, and I had different perspectives on both the design and the manufacture of the knee implants. After graduating, I then started my job at NASA, which I think might be of the most interest to you all, but that's where I was. And I worked there for about 7 years, and I worked in mission control as a biomedical flight controller, where I and others monitored the health of the astronauts on board the International Space Station. So when I joined, the International Space Station was in fact quite new. It is now, more than 20 years old, I assume, because when I started in 1999, they had yet to launch a human to the International Space Station. So I believe the first human launched in late 99 or early 2000. I can't exactly remember. And I was the lead Expedition 2 biomedical flight controller. And that launched in March of 2001. I was also the lead BME for Expedition 5 and Expedition 10. I have absolutely no idea what expedition they're on right now. I think it's something in the 40s, something like that. So I was there for about 7 years. And while I was there, I studied for my master's in public health. So I was working and doing that part-time online learning, which actually was a new thing back then. So it was one of the very first programs that did this type of online training. So I got my master's at Johns Hopkins. I did have to go there a few times to finish out my degree, but otherwise I finished that in a few years while working at NASA and while leading the 10th expedition. So it was quite a bit of work at the time for me. And after I got my degree, I decided, well, it was time to move on and to try to focus my career more on public health. So I had really focused a lot of my career initially on STEM, but then decided that I really wanted to refocus it more towards public health. And I quit my job at NASA, and I ended up volunteering, in fact, for the Clinton Foundation in Boston. And so I left Houston and I went back to Boston, and I worked there for 6 months. And I was really just working in their main office, doing basic administrative things, actually. So after a really successful career as an engineer, I was now working basically as an intern. But it was a risk that I took because it was the career change that I really wanted. And towards the end of that internship, I started interviewing for different jobs. And one of the jobs that came up within the Clinton Health Access Initiative was one in Ethiopia. And this one actually took my engineering background and combined it with public health, which made me super excited and super happy because I was able to really combine my two professions and my two loves, really. So I started working at the Clinton Health Access Initiative in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, as their medical equipment program manager. So we were basically bringing in medical equipment to equip rural health centers across the country as they were kind of expanding their health program. So I did that for a number of years. And then I left there and started my job, not my current job, but at my current workplace. So I currently work at the World Health Organization, and I started my work there under the medical devices group. So we work to develop different guidelines and things around the use of medical devices. After a few years there, they in fact ran out of money, and my contract had to sadly come to an end. But I stayed in Switzerland because I had met my husband here. So I, in fact, ended up finding another job, which was a bit different and not very related to technology at the time. And that is what I do now. And that is pandemic influenza preparedness work. So it's actually quite fitting to what's going on in the world right now. A lot of the work that I had been working on in the last couple of years is really feeding into the COVID response. So while I wasn't doing technology work, I was really doing a lot of health-related work and work that was really passionate about because we can really help the world and help people stay healthy. And that's really what I have focused my career on. So ever since I started working in biomedical engineering, my focus has always been on wanting to help people live healthier lives and to be able to treat them, be it through a medical device, be it through public health means. So that is it, not so much in a nutshell, but that is a quick summary of my career. Over to you, Isabella.
Well, that's certainly very amazing. It's amazing how one degree can lead to so many different opportunities, especially some so pressing to today. You wouldn't think that someone who worked at NASA would also work at the World Health Organization at some point. That's really interesting. So I know Eva had a question, so you can go first, Eva, if you'd like to unmute.
All right. So first of all, wow. Just wow. Like that career path, I was not expecting. There's so much to unpack it here. First of all, I really admire the fact that like anybody who has a job that coincides with their aspirations to helping like humanity is so interesting and admirable. Like first of all, thank you for like all your like everything that you do. This wow.
Thank you.
And
that means a lot, Eva. Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh wow. I'm sorry. I'm a little flustered. My question was, we're obviously at a young age, not everybody knows like what career they want to do. Who are some people in your life that kind of guided you down this path, or what were some factors that influenced you to change careers, or at least get an idea of where you would go in life?
Yeah, sure. Great question. And thank you again, Eva. That was very nice of you. Very kind words. Very humbling. So I think it's really interesting, at 17, 18, to know exactly what it is that you want to do. And I think we put a lot of pressure on people that age to know exactly and precisely what it is that they want to do. And I think what my experience shows is that sometimes that shifts. I do admit that I always had this passion for public health. And that came from my uncle, in fact, because my uncle was an epidemiologist with PAHO, which is the Pan American Health Organization. And he lived in all different countries in Latin America, traveling around, not traveling around, but living in different countries. And really, the focus of his work was cholera. And so that was a widespread disease, and it still is. Fortunately, there's now a vaccine for it, but at the time there wasn't. And so he worked on that, and I just found it absolutely fascinating. When I was a junior in high school, I remember writing a report on cholera, and the biology teacher being like, well, this is kind of random. Like, why would you write a report on cholera of all things? And I said, well, it's my uncle. This is what he works in. And I was just really fascinated, and that he could help so many people with this just really terrible, terrible, life-threatening disease. And in the way that he did it. So at the time I thought, I'm going to be a physician, because he was a physician and an epidemiologist, and that's what I want to study. But I didn't want to necessarily just study biology. I felt like, well, what happens if I don't actually like medicine, or I don't, like that something falls through or doesn't work out for me. And so I started doing research, and I came across biomedical engineering, and I thought it was absolutely fabulous. Like the idea of the biomedical engineering is so broad. So, I mean, there's the medical devices, but there's just so much that you can do with that degree. And I was just blown away by it. And so that's where I applied. Those are the programs that I applied to, and I stuck with it for 4 years, and it was hard. It was really, really hard. But I really felt that was the way that my career path was going to go. And I, in fact, had applied to master's programs in biomechanical engineering. So I'd mentioned at the beginning that a lot of my work when I was in college was around biomechanics. So I had applied to different programs, and I got into Stanford and into Berkeley for their biomechanics programs. But I then had this interview at NASA, and I realized that, I just wasn't quite ready to take that leap into specializing into biomechanics. I just wasn't sure. So I decided that I'll take a year or two. I mean, this job at NASA sounds pretty cool, and it uses my degree. So this will give me time to think about it. Also help build my resume. I think this is a really great opportunity. So fortunately for me, I got the job. So when it came back down a couple of years later, I really reevaluated things. And biomechanics isn't actually the way that I want to go. And after working a couple of years at NASA, what I realized is that I was helping, and it was a great job, and I would recommend it to anyone to work at NASA for sure if that's your passion. But for me, I really felt that at the core, what I wanted to do was to help, as you said, Eva, humanity. I was helping a few core astronauts stay healthy and make sure that they could continue doing their work in space. And what they do up there actually also fundamentally helps humanity. So let's not forget that. But I really wanted to be more on the ground with, in developing countries and trying to get them better health care and to be able to live better lives, because I truly believe that, we shouldn't, just the circumstances of our birth shouldn't dictate the kind of health care that we receive and the kind of lives that we are able to live. So that was fundamentally what made me go back to school and to get my degree in public health. So I hope that answers your question. What do you think? Over to you, Emma.
Once again, just wow. Well, first of all, it's very helpful and reassuring that to know that, hey, if you're in the middle of a career, it's okay that you want to change paths or you realize that you don't like something. That's something that I've always been worried about, going into a field and committing myself to it, but then worrying that, if I don't like it, what's going to happen? And it's good to know that even if I change my mind, or if even any young person changes their mind, they have the time to continue and always be learning something new, no matter what, and adapting to your surroundings and such. Just thank you.
Absolutely. And everything that you learn from the one job that you've had, even if it seems so vastly different, it really applies. It really, really does apply. I mean, when I got to Addis Ababa, there was so many similarities of trying to treat health or to have healthcare in these rural parts of Africa. Really, it was similar to trying to treat an astronaut in space in some ways. And so a lot of that knowledge that I had gained, I was able to apply elsewhere. And I think so long as you can really sell yourself and are passionate about what you want to do, I think these things will happen organically in a way. You have to obviously work hard and you have to take chances and risks. There was no guarantee that all of this was going to work out for me, but it did. Thank God.
So I think our next question is from Emily.
Okay, so since you work for the World Health Organization, do you know more about COVID, how long it takes for natural immunity to last? Because I got COVID 2 weeks ago, and I was recommended to get the vaccine. So how long do I have to wait till I get the vaccine?
Yeah, sorry, yeah, I forgot your name here. Was it?
Emily.
Hi, Emily. Sorry. Um, Emily, I'm actually do not work in COVID, so I cannot answer that question for you, unfortunately. I know that you probably will have immunity for a bit as a result of having had COVID, but that really does depend on the viral dosage that you had, how severe your COVID was. And yes, we do recommend that you get a vaccination after you've had COVID. But how long after, it's something that you would need to discuss with your physician. So,
Okay.
and then just to let you know, yeah, I work very peripherally around COVID. And the work that I do has always been around pandemic influenza and preparing for a potential outbreak of influenza. And while there's a lot of similarities to what's happening now in COVID, it doesn't directly apply, and I'm not directly working on the response at the moment.
That's definitely interesting how the two are related, though, the similarities, like you said. But everyone should be getting their vaccine. I'm getting my second dose Friday. Someone wish me luck. I'm scared. Not the vaccine, of the side effects. So
it'll be fine.
I was fine for my first dose. Just had a little bit of a headache, but I get those all the time, so probably unrelated. So I have a question myself, actually. So since biomedical engineering is such a broad field, how did you find this job at NASA, and what was your favorite part of that job?
Yeah, so as I said, I was working a lot in biomechanics. So my area of interest was specifically in bone health. And and as you might be aware, is when astronauts travel into space, their bones deteriorate because there is no gravity. So I think that was my first connection between biomedical engineering and then trying to get, to be interested in the job at NASA. And I actually, because I did my co-op, the 9-month internship with Johnson & Johnson, I actually graduated a semester later than everyone else. So I had friends who had graduated in May, and I was graduating in January. And I had a friend who had actually gotten a position at NASA, and he said, "Hey, we're hiring. If you're interested, you want to apply?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And it was through that. I mean, a lot of the jobs that you get in your life comes through your network. And in fact, I would say that all of my jobs have come that way. The only one that I didn't and that I just kind of applied for was my Clinton Foundation volunteer job. That one I just applied out of the blue and got it. But all my other positions have come through networking and through meeting people and through people that you know. So that's how that job came to be. And the second part of your question, Isabella, was what did I like the most? Okay. Oh gosh, there were so many things. It was a really cool job. Working in mission control was by far a highlight. I mean, after, doing it a certain amount of time, it just becomes your job, you don't think about it. But I think in retrospect, being able to do that was amazing. And one of the highlights that I had was when I started the biomedical engineering position. If you don't know the layout of mission control has front room flight controllers. So that includes the flight directors. You might have seen, like, let's say, an Apollo 13 movie or something. You have the lead flight director, and then you have its supporting positions. And one of the supporting positions has always been the flight surgeon. And the biomedical engineer was sat in the back room as a supporting position to the flight surgeon. So all the other positions have similar setups. So they'll have a front room and a back room. And so we started off as back room. So I would say it was the fourth expedition of the space station flights that the biomedical flight controller became a front room position. And so for me, and I was the first one to sit as the first biomedical flight controller to sit in the front room. So for me, that was a huge honor, and that was absolutely one of the highlights that I had while I was there. Another one was flying on the Vomit Comet. So I got to experience zero gravity, and we took a plane and the plane does these parabolas. And at the bottom of the parabola, you'll feel 2 times the force of gravity, and at the top, you'll feel no gravity. And so at the top, you have about, I think it's about 30 seconds to have, or maybe a minute even, to float around and to try to do the things that you were tasked to do while we were there. And then you do about 40 parabolas, I believe it is, 20, a break, and then another 20. Unfortunately, I didn't make it that long. It stayed true to his name, and it is a vomit comet. And yeah, so yes, I vomited, but it was a fantastic experience regardless. And then, yeah, I think just being in the thick of things as we're building the space station, being part of history, because really it is part of history. Having built the space station, now it's fully built. Now it can support many more astronauts than when I was there. It could only support about 3 at the time. And now I think it supports more. I actually don't know how many, but I mean, it's a huge, huge facility. And when I was there, it was just two modules, and that we were slowly building upon. So being part of that and seeing that growth, and being able to contribute to how the biomedical flight control team grew and had influence as part of the rest of the flight controllers. So I think that all of those are great highlights. And of course, all the famous people you get to meet, that was a little perk as well. So, yeah.
That's absolutely incredible. I myself am actually interested in biomedical engineering, so that's really cool to know that those options would be available to me. So I think Emily actually has another question, so.
Go ahead, Emily.
What's your favorite part of working with the World Health Organization?
Favorite part, okay. You know, it's not as, I'm gonna say it straight out, it's not as cool as NASA. But I think that having this impact on public health, and particularly now with COVID, seeing the power of WHO, really being able to affect change on a global level is super, super, it makes me super proud to be part of WHO, because it's not easy. And I think if you follow anything about WHO, you can see that our Director General is working really hard to communicate these messages. Let's say about vaccine equity. That's the biggest one that we're talking about right now. There's a huge inequity about how we're delivering the vaccines around the world. So, and I'm going to say this straight out, you guys are getting vaccinated right now, but we have healthcare workers in developing countries who haven't received a shot. Not a single shot has come to their country. And that is a travesty. And it's not just a travesty for that country, but it's a travesty for the world, because we're really at a crossroads with this disease. The more it's allowed to spread rampantly without effective treatment or effective vaccines, you're going to have more variants, and you're going to have, where we may be back in this again, where the vaccines that we're getting now aren't not going to be effective enough because the virus has mutated. So we need to take action now to make sure that these countries are getting vaccines on an equitable basis. And that is what we've been working on the pandemic flu team. And so we actually have agreements in place with manufacturers that will agree to distribute a certain percentage of their pandemic vaccines at the time of a pandemic in real time. So while they're distributing the vaccines to rich countries, they're also distributing it to WHO, who will then send it on to countries in need. And that didn't exist for COVID. And so that's what they tried to do by building COVAX. So yeah, I think being able to learn the lessons that we're learning now and be able to apply them for the work that I'm doing is super exciting to me. I love working with the people that I do. They're equally as passionate about this. And so there's a lot of things to love, and it's a super exciting time.
Also, with all COVID and stuff, I keep hearing about fulfilling antibodies or something. What are can you explain the process, how the antibodies I guess?
Okay, so when you get sick, your body will develop antibodies, and you can be tested to perhaps you got sick but didn't know if it was COVID or not, you can get tested for the antibodies. It's quite complex. You develop different antibodies at different times. So you'll have a set of antibodies when you get it, and then you'll have a set of antibodies that will last longer over a certain period of time, 6 months, 2 years, 10 years, depends on the disease. And there's a lot of unknowns still with COVID. So we don't know how long immunity lasts based off illness and based off the vaccine. So we don't know that either. So from the vaccine, we have to keep following the cohorts that were in the initial studies to see how long the immunity is lasting. So I'm not sure I answered your question, Emily, but that's a bit of a quick overview of antibodies and how they work.
Okay.
Okay, does anyone else have any more specific questions? No, why don't I see Michelle had some questions. Unfortunately, Michelle's not able to speak today, so I will be her voice. So let me pull them up to see. I'm sure she had some really good ones. Have you ever faced any challenges working in such a male-dominated environment?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's funny because biomedical engineering is actually quite dominated by females. So when I went to school, the School of Engineering, which was the majority was men, but in the biomedical engineering program, it was quite a lot of women. So I never felt intimidated. I never felt like, I was the only woman in the room. When I got to NASA, it was in fact similar. So my team was 90% women. Of course, the bosses were men, but the team itself was mostly women. The challenge there was getting respect because we were young women. We were in our early 20s. And as most flight controllers are actually quite young, so that's an important fact to note, but mostly are male. So we had a team that often we would sit in mission control and we would be the only female in the room. And it could be intimidating at times because the way men work with each other is a bit different in the way they interact with women. So there was a bit of sexism that could be sensed, and we had to really gain the respect of our male counterparts in some ways. I mean, it really depended on who you were working with. There were some men that were obviously more sexist than others. And, you just had to prove yourself. And over the years, what I found really, really amazing, though, was that even the other disciplines of engineering, in fact, had quite a few women supporting their teams. So I have some phenomenal friends who are now in some amazing positions who are females. So one of my friends ended up being a capsule communicator, which is a high position within mission control. I have another one who's currently the deputy counsel at Blue Origin. So these are women who are highly successful. The first lead flight director was a flight controller that I worked with at the time, and she's now the head flight director at NASA. But there's still quite a gap. From what I understand, it's still like a quarter women only. So there's a lot it's still a lot to climb, and we still have work to do in terms of equality between men and women in these positions, and particularly in leadership positions. And I think that's the work that needs to be done. But in terms of how I felt myself, I never really felt that my gender played a role into where I could go or how I could succeed. I truly felt that was up to me, and it's how I interpreted the situation, and if I let myself be intimidated by the situation I was in. And so I had to learn to speak up for myself and to speak loudly sometimes, and sometimes that was frowned upon, or people didn't like it, as in not used to a woman speaking up or speaking their mind. And so I sometimes face backlash for that. But you just keep moving ahead, and you learn from your situations, and you learn to gauge where and how to deal with particular situations. And I think you just learn, and you deal with it. But I never really felt that gender inhibited me. I think gender inhibits us if we let it.
That is definitely very inspirational, and I think a lesson that we should all learn. So I have another submission of a question from Cameron this time. So she asks how you manage balancing your master's while also working, and if there was any point where you felt overwhelmed dealing with both of those.
Good question, and absolutely. I about cracked. Honestly, it was extremely difficult to balance the two. Especially since I wasn't just working, I was the lead for the 10th expedition. And the 10th expedition had quite a few issues, one being that they almost ran out of food. So that was a big deal at the time, and it was a lot of pressure on me to have to handle that job plus almost a full workload. So I did almost crack. It was very difficult, and I would say this, that if you can go to school separately from your job, I would highly recommend doing it, because it's very, very challenging to try to do both well. But if you can't, it is manageable. I did it. I had to extend the time period that I did my public health degree in, because I did have to back out of some of the classes that I was taking. It was just too much to handle. So I think realistically, the best thing to do is to go back to school, if you can do that. But if you can't, to try to understand where the workloads are in each scenario. But yeah, it was difficult. It was a challenge.
Thank you for that advice. And I think another great piece of advice would be, do you have any advice for people like us, high schoolers who are interested in pursuing a career in STEM?
Sure. Well, first off, do it. Please pursue a career in STEM. There's still such a shortage of women in this career. And if you are excited by science and by technology and by math and by engineering, please, do apply your skills to that, because we need that. But know that, like I said earlier, you're not tied to this. And even men who go into engineering don't all end up doing the science and doing the engineering. They'll end up being the managers, the leaders, the CEOs. And for that, I say that your science and engineering degrees will come in incredibly handy, because you will see the world in a different way. We're problem solvers. We see, things in a very organized type of structure that other majors see, and they have their skills that they bring to the table as well. But our skills are very highly needed. And I think in terms of advice, I would say you just need to follow your heart and follow what it is that you want to do. Success is defined only by you. You are the one who says, this is what matters to me, not what somebody else says. Oh, well, it's great if you did this or that. Or if somebody tells you, no, well, why are you doing that? When I left NASA, people really judged me. People were very critical of my decision. Well, how can you leave your job at NASA? You have such a great career and you're going to go volunteer? Like, are you crazy? And my response to that at first was, oh my God, maybe I am crazy. What am I doing? What am I thinking? I'm quitting this great job. But I wasn't doing something that was singing to my heart at that time. I knew that I had to do something else. And I took that risk and I took that chance and I followed my heart. And I think that's super important to do. I think that risk should always be calculated. I don't think, you cannot, quit your job and you have no savings and, things don't work out. And that's a bad idea. You really need to take your risks and make sure that they're calculated ones. But you should take risks and you shouldn't be scared of them. And so, yeah, I think that's one of my biggest advice that I tell people just generally, like, you have to take risks in life and it may not always work out for you, but you're going to learn from that as well, and you'll learn how to adjust, you fix, and then you move on. People often ask me, well, what's your biggest failure? And I don't actually remember them because you learn from them and you move on from them. And what you do end up getting is a success in your mind, at least mine. And yeah, so I would definitely say follow your heart, do what makes you happy and what makes your heart sing, and I think things will work out for you.
That is definitely some great advice. Thank you. So does anyone else have any other questions that they'd like to ask? Is that a hand, Emily, or no? No? Okay.
One other thing that I would add is that what I found very helpful was to find a role model. Find someone that, and it might have just be one role model. It could be multiple. You can have one for career, one for different areas of your life. As someone that you see living life in a way that you would like to live it. That's very helpful. And it was always helpful to me. And that role model doesn't have to be older. And often some of the cases I found role models that were younger than me, and different ages have different things to bring to the table. The older we get, perhaps we have more experience, but the younger you are, you see things in a different and innovative way. So I think we need to be open to who our role models are and who we listen to. So I'll leave you with that little tidbit, and good luck to all of you. I think good luck with your careers in STEM. I hope that you do pursue them. But if you don't, whatever you do in life, it's going to be great.
Thank you so much. That was definitely, I found what you had to say extremely interesting. You've definitely had a very successful career and life and had some awesome advice. So if anyone else doesn't have any questions, we can wrap it up for today. I'd like to say a very big thank you from me and the rest of the Women in STEM Club for making the time to come speak to us. And it was really nice getting to know you.
Thank you, Isabel. It was a real pleasure to talk to you and to all of you. And if you ever have any questions for me in the future, I'm here. You can always send me a little note.
Thank you so much.